We're in the series, Taking Responsibility for Your Life. And for those of you who were here last week, I wonder if this week you thought about that at all. If you thought about taking responsibility. I know some of you have taken some steps toward taking responsibility this week. And so I hope that was helpful for you. But last week, we tried to answer the question, am I taking responsibility for my life? Not am I a responsible person. Most of us, if not all of us in this room, are responsible people. But am I taking responsibility for my life? Am I taking responsibility for my past actions, for my past reactions? And am I taking responsibility for my future obligations? And the reason why that is so important is because whenever we have a responsibility that we don't fulfill, if we become irresponsible, our responsibility falls onto someone else. And that makes somebody else responsible for the thing that we were responsible for. And we've said that when we do that, then that is putting a burden on them, and that's not actually a good thing for them. That's not a loving thing for them to do. It's not a loving thing for us to do to them. And so we have this idea here where our irresponsibility is not really an act of love, because it's something that they didn't necessarily sign up for, they didn't necessarily agree to, they didn't necessarily want, but it just got dumped on them because of our irresponsibility. And so that's not the loving thing to do. And so we ask the question, well then, what does love require of me? And we've asked that question multiple times around here, and it's a good question to ask in a lot of situations. And it's a good question to ask when it comes to responsibility. What does love require of me? And we said for you and for me that love requires us to take responsibility for our lives, to do our best to fulfill our responsibilities, but there are going to be times where we fall short. There's going to be times where we mess up, where we drop the ball. And in those times where we drop the ball and mess up, are we owning that? Are we taking ownership of our responsibility, of our part of messing up? And are we doing whatever it takes to clean up that mess? Are we doing whatever it takes to apologize and to make restoration and to do all the things necessary to clean up that mess? And so whenever we talk about that, we asked a couple of more questions, and one of the questions is, has your irresponsibility become someone's responsibility? Has your irresponsibility, has that fallen on to someone else? And if that's the case, then what are you doing to make that right? What are you doing to fix that, to remedy that, to make up for that? So that's a helpful question in terms of if you're going to take responsibility for your life. And then we asked one more question. We said, are you currently engaged in something or neglecting something that will in all likelihood create a future mess for someone else to clean up? Is there something that you're doing now or not doing now that's going to create a future mess for somebody to clean up? Is it something that you're not doing or are doing, something health-wise where you're doing or not doing, that's eventually somebody else is going to have to look after you or clean up the mess that you're creating in the future? See, that's answering those kinds of questions and figuring out that kind of thing is helping us to take responsibility for our lives. Now, we can ask the question and we can get answers to those questions, but if we don't do anything about it, well then that's not taking responsibility either. So asking the questions are helpful, but only to a certain point. You have to actually do the work and follow through with the answers to your questions. And so today I want to throw us another question out there. I want to add another question to our list of questions. And the question is, am I taking responsibility for the me nobody can see? Am I taking responsibility for the me that's inside me? My heart and my mind and my soul and what's going on inside me? Am I taking responsibility for that person? The things that are inside me, the anger and bitterness and unforgiveness and worry and those kinds of things that are in there that nobody else can see and nobody else knows about. You know, the imaginary conversations that I'm having with those people or that person that nobody knows about. It's the things that, it's the secretly celebrating when somebody else fails. and celebrating that because they failed. It's those things that are inside us that we don't want coming out. It's the things inside of us that nobody can really see and nobody knows about. But we know. And God knows. And this is true whether you're a religious person or not. This is true and you can decide to play along if you want to, if you're here today and that would describe you. That this person that you're here and you're still trying to figure out who Jesus is and what who he claimed to be and all of that. And did he rise from the dead? I just want to say, if that's you here today, I'm so glad you're here. And if that's you today, you can decide to play along or not. I think it'll help you in life, but it's completely up to you. But if you're a Jesus follower, what Jesus says to us today in terms of all of this, because he speaks to this issue. He speaks to the issue of what to do and how to take responsibility for the me that's inside me. And how to deal with all of that. How to deal with the things that are going on in my heart and in my mind. The things that I don't want anybody else to see. Jesus actually addresses this, and Matthew, who was there, who was one of Jesus' closest followers, he writes it down for us. And Jesus one day, he's in a conversation with a huge crowd of people, and there's lots of different people in the crowd. There's some religious people and some Jesus followers and some other people in this crowd, and he has this long conversation. We're not going to look at the whole conversation. You can read that for yourself. But we're going to look at part of it. And in this part, we're going to look at what Jesus says about how to take responsibility for what's going on inside you. He says this. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites." He just comes right out and just kind of goes right at them. These religious leaders, he says, woe to you. He says, I wish you weren't living this way. I wish you weren't doing these things. And so what is it that they were doing? How were they living? He says, you clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. He says, you live your lives and you do all the right things. Everybody looks at you and thinks you're close to God and you're doing all these things. But he says, because he's Jesus and he can see inside of us and he knows what's going on inside of us, he says, you're full of greed and self-indulgence. What's going on inside you is not good. What's going on inside you is not healthy. And he says, you need to deal with that. And if you don't deal with that, I don't care what else you do, you've got to deal with what's going on inside you. He carries on. He says, blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean. He says you got to deal with what's going on inside you, and then the things you're doing outwardly, he says those things will become good. Those things will become pure. You'll have the right motives. You'll be pleasing God in all that. But if the inside isn't right, if your motives aren't right, if your mind's not right, if your heart's not right, well then doing all the right things doesn't make a bit of difference. He says you've got to get your inside cleaned out first. Then he basically says the same thing, except he uses different imagery, and then he kind of is trying to make a even sharper point here. He says this. He says, woe to you. He's back to this. Teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. All right, here we go. I still don't like how you're doing things. I still don't like how you're living. He says, you are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. In that day and time, they put tombs in the side of a mountain, and so there was all this rock, and so they would whitewash it. So one, it looked good, but also so that when people walk by, they would understand that this is a tomb, and so they wouldn't go touch it and then themselves become ceremonially unclean. And so they were this beautiful, beautiful thing on the side of the mountain. Well, Jesus is saying, hey, you guys, you're like that. Looks good on the outside, but what's on the inside? Decaying bones, death, filth, all up on the inside of that mountain, of that tomb. Jesus is saying, you guys are like that. Everybody looks at you and they think you're amazing and all of this, and you're doing all the right things because you show up in all the right places. because they were the religious leaders and they showed up in all the right places at all the right times looking the part. But because Jesus could see into their hearts and into their minds, he knew what was in there. And he said, what is in there, what is inside you, is full of dead bones, full of filth, full of rot and decay. Now these guys were the religious leaders. These guys were the teachers. They were the ones who were supposed to be close to God. They were the ones who were supposed to have it all figured out. They were the ones that from everybody's perspective, they were doing all the right things. And Jesus was saying, he said there at the end, he says, back up, the bones of the dead and everything unclean. Everything they did was about being ceremonially clean. Because they had to be. And so they were so focused on that, on the outward appearance, on being ceremonially clean, but not clean on the inside. And Jesus was telling them, hey, you're not fit to go to the temple, much less work at the temple. And this cuts straight to the heart. And Jesus says then, in the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Jesus is saying, I know what's going on inside you, and it's not good. And he says, I wish you would stop living this way. I wish you would continue doing all the right things, continue doing the things, showing up at the temple, showing up to pray, teaching people, do all of that, continue doing all the right things. He says, but I want you to do it from a pure heart. I want you to do it from a clean heart. I want you to clean up all the things that are on the inside so that those things will be pure. And so, what Jesus is saying is clean it all up. And I don't think any of you would want to live that way. I think all of us would want to be clean hearts, clean on the inside. I think I want to just assume that. And so I want to assume that's true for all of us in the room, no matter where you're at here today on the religious spectrum. But if that's true, if none of us want to be like that, none of us want to be like the Pharisees, if that's true, then can I assume, I'm just asking the question, can I assume then that you wake up every morning spending as much time on your inside as you do your outside? Can I assume that? Can I assume that you wake up every morning and go stand in front of the mirror to make sure your heart and your mind are right and your heart and your mind look good? Can I assume that you're steaming out all the wrinkles of your motives? Can I assume you're flossing your soul? Can I assume you're spending so much time cleaning up the inside, making sure the inside is right? As much time on that as you do on the outside? By the way, your outsides look good this morning. See, I know how much time you spend on your outside. You spend as long as it takes. For some of you, it takes longer than others. For some of you, it's right, and you're off to go. But you stand in front of the mirror for as long as it takes to get the result that you're looking for. What if we did that for our insides? What if we spent as much time as it took? Whatever it would take. And for some of us, it would take longer than others. But what if we spent that much time on our insides? See, that's what Jesus said. Jesus said, we looked at this a second ago. He said, first, clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside will also be clean. First. I wonder if we did that first, before we did all the other stuff. But before we went to church, before we prayed, before we did our Bible study, before we went to serve, before we did any of the things that we do, and I'm not suggesting we stop doing any of that. But what if first, before we did all that, we said, God, what's going on in here? God, reveal to me. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me. And then lead me in the way everlasting. What if we woke up every morning spending time doing that? Getting our hearts and our motives pure. God, is there anything in here? And so that's how we take responsibility for the me that nobody can see. And so as we ask that question, I wonder if we would just spend some time on some other questions to help us answer that question. And so I want to give you a few questions that perhaps you would use tomorrow morning or perhaps tomorrow night before you go to bed. This is not an exhaustive list, but I just want to try to be as practical as possible because I know how important it is to have what's on the inside be clean and pure and right with God. So the first question is, what are you thinking about? What are you thinking about? Is it good things and right things and holy things and honorable things, or is it things we don't talk about in certain company? What are you thinking about? Well, what do you try not to think about? I mean, you just can't help yourself to think about these things, but you're trying so hard not to think about them, but yet you can't help but think about them. What are you trying not to think about? How about this one? What are you worried about? Is there anything going on in there that you're worried about? So on the other side of worry, what should you be concerned about? Is there something that you should be concerned about, but you're not concerned because you're just... Is there something that you should be thinking about and should be concerned about and should be dealing with, but you're just putting it off? Or how about this one? What are you considering? Is there something you're considering doing? And does it line up with the teachings of Jesus? Or how about this one? What are you secretly planning? I'm not talking about your kid's birthday party. Is there something you're planning to do, but you're not telling anyone because, well, they would tell you it's wrong, and you know it's wrong, but you're going to secretly plan to do it anyway? What are you avoiding? Is there something you're avoiding doing? You're avoiding that person. You're avoiding that issue. You're avoiding that apology. You're avoiding... Is there anything that you're avoiding? How about this one? What are you craving? Is there something you're craving? Maybe you haven't given in to the temptation yet, but there's something you're craving, and you know if the craving goes on for too long, you're going to give in because you just know you are. And is there something that you're craving that you got to get sorted out before it becomes an issue? Now, this list is not an exhaustive list, but I think these questions are helpful because I think all of us want to be the person that we present ourselves to be, but there's a gap. There's a gap between the person that we want to be and the person that we are. The person that we're present to everyone else and the person that is inside of us. And if we're going to close that gap, if we're going to be the person that Jesus wants us to be, where our public persona, the person that we present to everyone, if we're going to be that person on the inside, that's what it means to follow Jesus. That's how we take responsibility for our life. That's how we take responsibility for the me nobody can see. Let's pray. Father, I pray that you would give us clean hands and clean hearts. God, that you would help us, not just once off, but to on a regular basis, God, that you would help us to take inventory of what's going on inside of us. God, and then may you help us to understand it and to clean it out and to get right and to get pure and to get clean. God, give us the courage to follow through with these things. God, help us to take responsibility for our lives, that we might live lives pleasing to you. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.